While on the job, there are times when you will come into contact with blood or other potentially infectious materials that can make you ill. That's why it's important you not only learn to recognize these situations, but you also learn to protect yourself and others from becoming infected. This training discusses how infections occur, the bloodborne diseases that cause concern, how bloodborne pathogens are spread, and how to protect yourself from disease transmission. Prevention includes practicing personal hygiene, using personal protective equipment, and following engineering and work practice controls. Remember, the better informed you are about infectious diseases, the less likely you are to contract or transmit them. Before discussing types of infectious diseases, we should first consider how infections occur. Any disease that can be passed from person to person, from animals or from insects, is considered infectious. The disease process begins when the disease-causing pathogen or germ enters the body. Generally, the skin and mucous membranes of the mouth, nose, and eyes do an efficient job of keeping pathogens from entering the body. However, if the barriers fail and a pathogen enters the body's immune system begins working to fight the disease. Once inside the body, certain pathogens can overwhelm the immune system, causing a serious infection. Left untreated, certain infections can be deadly. The two most common types of pathogens are bacteria and viruses. Bacteria surround us every day, but these one-celled microorganisms do not depend on other organisms for life. They can live outside the body. Once inside the body, however, certain bacteria can cause diseases such as strep throat and tetanus. Bacterial infections may be relatively simple to treat if caught early. Antibiotics are often prescribed to help eliminate conditions caused by bacteria. Viruses, on the other hand, depend on other organisms to live and reproduce. Typically, most viral infections are difficult to treat with medication. Viruses can be carried in the blood or in other body fluids. Bacteria and viruses carried in the blood are called blood-borne pathogens. Based on the OSHA bloodborne pathogen standard, your employer has determined you may have occupational exposure to blood or other potentially infectious materials. This means while performing your job duties, it is anticipated you may come in contact with blood or other potentially infectious materials. The bloodborne pathogens of primary concern are the hepatitis B virus, hepatitis C virus, and HIV. The hepatitis B virus, or HBV, causes hepatitis B, a serious liver infection. Hepatitis B may be severe or even fatal. There are some medications available to treat chronic hepatitis B infection. However, these medications do not work for everyone. Hepatitis C is a liver disease caused by the hepatitis C virus, formerly called non-A, non-B hepatitis. Hepatitis C is the most common chronic bloodborne infection in the United States. AIDS is caused by HIV. HIV attacks white blood cells and destroys the body's ability to fight infection. People infected with HIV may not feel or look sick. They may not even know they have the disease.
Take your hand, place it over the cut.
Fortunately, all of these diseases are preventable. One of the best ways to protect yourself is to understand the conditions necessary for a bloodborne disease to be spread. First, a pathogen must be present. Second, it must be sufficient in quantity to cause disease. Third, the pathogen must enter the body through a correct entry site. And finally, a person must be susceptible to the pathogen. If any of these conditions are missing, infection does not occur. The bloodborne pathogens, hepatitis B and C viruses, and HIV can be spread from person to person through direct or indirect contact with infected blood or other bodily fluids. These pathogens are not spread by sneezing, coughing, through food or water, or by casual contact, such as hugging or shaking hands. Most on-the-job exposure to bloodborne pathogens is through direct contact. Direct contact transmission occurs when infected blood or body fluids from one person enters another person's body at a correct entry site, such as through a break in the skin or a mucous membrane. For example, blood splashing in the eye is an example of direct contact. Bloodborne pathogens are also transmitted by indirect contact. Indirect contact transmission occurs when a person touches an object containing the infected blood or other body fluid, and that infected blood or body fluid enters the body through a correct entry site. Protecting yourself from disease transmission requires you modify your behavior and follow some basic practices. These include practicing good personal hygiene and using appropriate personal protective equipment. It also includes those practices your employer may require you to follow. Your personal hygiene is an important part of preventing infection. Washing your hands is an effective way to help keep you from getting sick. By washing your hands frequently, you wash away many disease-causing germs you might have picked up from other people or from contaminated objects. Wet your hands with water and apply liquid soap. Rub your hands vigorously for at least 15 seconds, covering all surfaces of the hands, giving added attention to fingernails and jewelry. Then rinse your hands with warm water and dry your hands thoroughly with a paper towel. Turn off the faucet using a paper towel. Alcohol-based hand sanitizers allow you to cleanse your hands when soap and water are not readily available and your hands are not visibly soiled. If your hands contain visible matter, you should use soap and water instead. If your hands are not visibly soiled, use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Wash your hands with soap and water or both. When using an alcohol-based hand sanitizer, apply the product to the palm of one hand. Rub your hands together. Rub the product over all surfaces of your hands and fingers until your hands are dry. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as it is available. Immunizations are an important part of maintaining your personal health, both on and off the job. OSHA requires employers to make the hepatitis B vaccine available free of charge to all employees who have the potential for on-the-job exposure. Furthermore, should an exposure occur, employers are required to provide post-exposure evaluation and follow-up. Appropriate personal protective equipment should be used whenever exposure to blood or other potentially infectious materials is likely. This equipment includes disposable gloves, gowns, eyewear, masks and shields, and resuscitation devices such as CPR breathing barriers. All are designed to prevent you from making contact with infectious materials, which can greatly decrease your risk of contracting or transmitting a disease. But it is not enough to have these devices available. You must know how to use them. Disposable gloves in latex or non-latex should always be worn when there is a possibility you could contact blood or other potentially infectious materials directly or indirectly. Wearing disposable gloves minimizes the exposure to blood and other potentially infectious materials. In general, jewelry should not be worn where the potential for risk of exposure exists. When removing gloves, remember the objective is to remove them without touching the outside of either glove. Never handle personal items such as pens or combs when wearing soiled gloves. CPR breathing barriers include a variety of resuscitation masks and face shields. These devices are placed between you and the victim's mouth and nose to prevent you from making direct contact with body fluids. You should know how to use any devices made available to you. Always change masks between contact with different people. Now that you know what to do to protect yourself, let's talk about what your employer can do. Your employer is responsible for implementing engineering and work practice controls as part of the exposure control plan. Engineering controls are physical devices that isolate or remove a hazard from a workplace. Examples include sharps disposal containers, self-sheathing needles, and safer devices such as sharps with engineered sharps injury protections or needleless systems. Work practice controls alter behavior. For instance, in certain situations, your employer may require you to wear protective equipment such as gloves. Changing the way sharp objects such as needles are handled can prevent needle stick injuries. Together, engineering and work practice controls greatly reduce your exposure to infectious hazards. Proper handling, cleaning, and disinfecting of soiled equipment, supplies, and other materials is important in preventing disease transmission. It combines both work practice and engineering controls. Sometimes an incident may result in a spill of blood or body fluids. Your first step in dealing with a spill is containment. Commercially available containment units designed for hazardous materials are very effective. Any absorbent materials can be used if they are disposed of properly. To manage a spill, follow these steps. Clean up spills immediately or as soon as possible. Always wear single-use disposable gloves and other personal protective equipment when cleaning up spills. If the spill is mixed with sharp objects such as broken glass and needles, do not pick up these items with your hands. Use tongs, a broom and dustpan, or 2 pieces of cardboard. Use absorbent materials to clean up the spill and dispose of the materials in a labeled biohazard container. Flood the area with a disinfectant solution and allow it to stand for at least 10 minutes. A recommended disinfectant solution is a fresh mixture of 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. Use paper towels to absorb the solution and put the paper towels in the biohazard container. Review the exposure control plan with your employer for equipment and procedures specific to your facility. The OSHA standard also requires that the work area be kept clean and sanitary to help prevent exposure to bloodborne pathogens. Specific procedures for cleaning and disinfecting equipment in your workplace should be outlined in the exposure control plan. Handle all soiled supplies, equipment, and other materials with care until they are properly cleaned and disinfected. Place all used disposable items in labeled containers. Place all soiled clothing in marked plastic bags for disposal or washing. Scrub soiled boots, leather shoes, and other leather goods such as belts with soap, a brush, and hot water. If you wear a uniform to work, wash and dry it according to the manufacturer's instructions. Floors, decks, countertops, and ambulance and automobile seats must be cleaned before using a disinfectant solution. Exposure incidents involve contact with blood or other potentially infectious materials through a needle stick, broken or scraped skin, or the mucous membranes of the mouth, nose, or eyes. If you have an exposure incident, wash needle stick injuries, cuts, or exposed skin with soap and water. If splashed with blood or other potentially infectious materials around the mouth or nose, flush the area with water. Irrigate eyes with clean water, saline, or sterile irrigants for 20 minutes. Following any exposure incident, you should immediately report the exposure incident to your supervisor and follow the steps in the exposure control plan for confidential medical evaluation and follow-up. Employers must maintain a sharps injury log for the recording of injuries with contaminated sharps. The log must maintain employee privacy, list the type and brand of the device involved in the incident, and include the location and description of the incident. This training is only a part of an overall exposure control plan. This plan is an important step in eliminating or minimizing employee exposure to blood or other potentially infectious materials. Minor changes can make a major difference in minimizing occupational hazards that may jeopardize your health. Remember, by practicing good personal hygiene, using personal protective equipment, and following engineering and work practice controls, you will take a big step towards safeguarding yourself and others against disease transmission.